we showcase conservative women, current events, and the hypocrisy of the feminist left. My name is Kelsey Harkness. I'm a senior news producer here with the Daily Signal, and joining me today is Inez Stepman, a senior contributor over at The Federalist. Inez, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Kelsey.
Now, everyone who's watching might be wondering what is going on with these big pink bows. Well, I'm going to toss to our first segment, which is called That Happened, and then maybe you'll understand.
In for her father at the G20.
Right, with big bows on her sleeve. I mean, I don't mean to sound sexist. It can be dangerous to comment on what women wear. But the fact that she sat in for her father in a dress that was so incredibly ornamental was such a contradiction in terms. And I think that what we see is that in authoritarian societies...
So some background here is that Ivanka Trump stepped in for her father at the G20 conference, and when she did that, she dared to wear a pink dress with bows on it. Inez responded with this amazing piece over at The Federalist, so you guys should all go read it. But Inez, sum up your response to this ridiculous commentary.
Well, I mean, I think you heard some of that commentary there, but it's just way over the top. I mean, let's start with the fact that whenever a liberal politician, female politician, gets criticized for her attire, it's called misogynistic and sexist. And then the second layer of this, I think, is that there's pretty much nothing that left-wing commentators won't throw out about feminism in order to attack conservative and Republican women. Because I remember, reading articles about how in the 80s women felt that they had to dress like men in order to be taken seriously in the workplace, in the boardroom. And I mean, Joan Walsh's comments are pretty much right back there, right? If you dress in a feminine manner, you can't be taken seriously at the table. She actually said, Ivanka can't be fighting for the rights of women while wearing this ridiculous dress.
Girly dress is how she described it. Like, how dare you dress? How dare you wear a dress that resembles the sex that you are? And I think it's important to mention that although there's certainly an age difference here, which makes a difference, but a Republican staffer was fired from her job for posting on her private Facebook page about what the Obama daughters were wearing. And then it's okay to criticize another president's daughter for her attire. It's just so hypocritical.
Yeah, right. And what's interesting is actually this particular commentator, Joan Walsh, she wrote an article back in 2012 about a speech that Michelle Obama gave at the Democratic National Convention in 2012. And it so happens that at that convention, Michelle Obama was wearing a very, very girly dress. It didn't have bows on it, but it was some sort of pink taffeta concoction. And Joan Walsh wrote this big glowing review of Michelle Obama's speech and how it communicated that she loved women. And yet she was able to get that political message from a woman wearing a pink dress when it was Michelle Obama. But now that it's Ivanka Trump, she can't be taken seriously. And she actually said it looks like she's her father's property, which I thought was way over the top.
Yes, yes. So I think that's exactly the type of rhetoric that we want to highlight on this show, because I think there's this narrative that conservative women don't support women and aren't for women's empowerment, when in reality, we actually don't think that you should be commenting on what women are wearing when they're sitting at the table. I mean, if this were another president's daughter who were sitting at that table, we would have very different responses. But let me move on to our next That Happened. But first, I'm going to let us take out the pink bows, because I'm not sure we'll be taken seriously for the rest of this Facebook show. But I hope you all appreciate that. We just wanted to have some fun here. Okay, so our next segment is Indiana Senator Maria Cantwell uses Medicad sign on the Senate floor. If you missed it on Twitter, it was quite a moment. I feel bad for some intern who was responsible for this, misspelled Medicaid, while this senator is on the floor giving this big speech, war on Medicad, of course relating it to the war on women, because everything has to be this big blown up war these days. But did you catch that on Twitter?
I did. I don't think it's too serious a moment, right? Just something to giggle over. I will say that if it were a conservative or Republican out on the floor with that sign, you'd get, I think, a much bigger coverage than it got. This was more of a, oh, haha, retweet this, like, it's funny. I do think that, our press tends to pick it up a lot more if it's a conservative caught saying something foolish or demonstrating something foolish.
I'll agree with you there. So our next one is Kid Rock is running for the Senate, and he's running against a Democrat in Michigan, I believe. And my reaction to this is that I have a lot of respect for Kid Rock. I like his music. I think he is smart and capable even, but I worry about this new trend of celebrity presidents.
Right, or celebrity politicians in general. I mean, do we really want Kim Kardashian next to run for Congress or whatever? I mean, look, I think it's not necessarily a negative. I think Donald Trump proved that with his win, that having a huge name recognition, having people know who you are in advance, can be a real big asset. Knowing how to deal with the media, with the way that celebrities do, can be a really big asset. I think after that, though, you really got to judge somebody on their merits, right? Nobody should be elected to office because they can write a good song or different skill sets.
I agree. Our next That Happened is a good one. This was a big issue this week. California Congressman Jackie Speier calls for Sleeveless Friday. And to give you the backstory on this, there was a reporter who was not allowed onto the speaker's chamber, I believe, because she was wearing a sleeveless dress. And as soon as the feminists caught wind of this, they were all out with hashtag inequality and saying that this is discriminatory and women should be able to dress the way they want to dress. But the reality is this is actually a long-standing rule in Congress, and you know more about that.
Well, it has been in place for a while. It was in place when Nancy Pelosi was the speaker. But more than that, I just think that, look, this is one of the most formal occasions possible. There's a dress code. I've heard that Paul Ryan is reconsidering the dress code. I don't think it's a huge deal to anyone. But for example, men have to wear not just a suit, but they have to wear a tie and an actual suit jacket that matches their slacks, like no sport coat. I mean, there have been lots of men turned away at the door, apparently, for not fulfilling the dress code. And this is just one special place where certain attire was required. I just don't understand sort of the whining about it. And it does go to that whole sort of something that you pointed out with this entire show, right? Which is this sort of new feminist left, let's say 30 years or so, that just takes all tiny things way too seriously, blows them all out of proportion, calls everything sexist and misogynistic, and that doesn't leave a lot of room for actual criticism.
Well, my favorite part about all this is Speaker Ryan's reaction was, okay, sure, we can work to change that. No big deal. And it's already in the works. They're changing it. I mean, not everything needs to be this outrageous political discriminatory attack against women. And this, you're right, this existed under Nancy Pelosi. This existed under many Democrats before that. This is not some, male Republican rule that women can't wear sleeveless dresses, but I will make a note that if you've ever been in Congress before, it's really cold in there, and you might not always want to be wearing a sleeveless dress. But I actually, personally, I support the right to bear arms in Congress. So I support Speaker Ryan moving to change this, but I don't support the way that Democrats are really blowing this up in a disproportional way. But okay, so our last That Happened. This is one that I got pretty heated up about this week. One of the co-chairs of the Women's March, Linda Sarsour, a lot of you have probably already seen what has gone on with her. She called for nonviolent jihad against the White House. And she then followed up, she doubled down with this after receiving a lot of criticism, particularly from conservatives. And she doubled down and said that it's conservatives, not just conservatives, right-wing extremists who are misunderstanding the true meaning of jihad, that it's really this peaceful struggle. So I wrote a response piece in The Federalist, and I did a video commentary. We're going to show you that to show you what I thought. Linda Sarsour is fighting back after being criticized for calling for jihad against President Trump and his administration. During a speech she gave at the Islamic Society of North America convention, she said,
"And I hope that when we stand up to those who oppress our communities, that Allah accepts from us that as a form of jihad, that we are struggling against tyrants and rulers, not only abroad in the Middle East or in the other side of the world, but here in these United States of America, where you have fascists and white supremacists and Islamophobes reigning in the White House."
Although Sarsour clearly called for a nonviolent form of jihad and anyone who suggests otherwise is being intellectually dishonest. Hearing the co-chair of the Women's March on Washington call for jihad against the Trump administration was triggering, to say the least. America has an ugly history with jihad. For millennials like myself, 9/11 was the defining moment of our generation. On that day, 19 terrorists used jihad to justify the killing of 2,977 innocent people. Instead of acknowledging this, or even being sensitive to the fact, Sarsour doubled down, writing in the Washington Post that it's our fault for misunderstanding what jihad really means. Most disturbing about this recent defamation campaign is how it is focused on demonizing the legitimate yet widely misunderstood Islamic term I used, jihad, which to a majority of Muslims and according to religious scholars means struggle or to strive for, she wrote. This term has been hijacked by Muslim extremists and right-wing extremists alike, leaving ordinary Muslims to defend our faith and in some cases silenced. If Sarsour is so concerned about reclaiming that term, she might consider starting by approaching the Washington Post, where she strategically chose to publish her response. 15 years after 9/11, the jihadist threat looms larger than ever across the globe, reads one headline in the Post. From U.S., the ABCs of jihad, reads another. The Islamic State creates a new type of jihadist, part terrorist, part gangster. In all of these articles, not once do the journalists mention the alternative, peaceful meaning of the term jihad. And yet, it is right-wing extremists who are at fault for hijacking the term. If Sarsour wants to have a theological debate about the true meaning of jihad, she's blessed with the platform to start it. But in using this term during that speech, that's not what she intended to do. A smart, educated activist, Sarsour knew that calling for jihad against our president would be inflammatory. And then she went one step further. She blamed us for being offended. Well, here's an idea. When you purposely try to provoke people, don't claim victim status when you succeed. Linda Sarsour, I pray that when I raise children of my own, they'll have to only know about the peaceful side of jihad, of which you so fondly speak. But in a day and age where Islamist terrorist attacks happen so regularly, we as Americans have no choice but to view jihad as an ugly, violent, and painful part of our own personal experience. So clearly I had some thoughts on that. But one thing I didn't mention in that video is I think it's really unfair the way that she is smearing conservatives to really be these like Islamophobes who are intentionally trying to misinterpret the way she used jihad, because having written this commentary and did some research on the way that this speech was written on by conservative news outlets, there was only one news outlet that I would say did not, in its lead, provide the full context. The rest of the news outlets have really gone overboard to provide the context and say, you know what, we know she didn't use it in the violent term, but that doesn't negate what the meaning is, what the meaning of jihad is to many of us who have personal experiences, sadly, with it, having lived through 9/11.
Well, exactly, and I think it's really interesting how the left is so sensitive about word usage and context all the time, and if a certain percentage of conservatives use a word a particular way, well then it must be evil or bad or sexist or misogynistic or all these other things, but Linda Sarsour can use this word jihad, where not obviously a small minority, but nevertheless, thousands of people, probably millions of people, do see the word jihad as something much stronger than what she says she was saying.
Struggle.
Yeah, and it's not that most of us are actually ignorant of that dual usage, but I think, like you wrote in your commentary, right, we still might think that was inappropriate to direct at the president.
Yes, and I think that if there really is this dual meaning that is so widely known, then there are a lot of journalists who are guilty of journalism malpractice, because if you Google 9/11 and jihad, you're going to get a bunch of New York Times, Washington Post, a bunch of different articles that use that word, and not once do they ever disclose in their piece we're talking about jihad. That is the central theme of this piece, but we're not even going to mention this alternative meaning, because I just think that if what she's saying is true and this is so prevalent, then journalists have a responsibility to report that, and they're not. So maybe she needs to go have a conversation with the Washington Post and the New York Times.
Right. Well, she's having a conversation with some people on Twitter. She says she's making a list. She's taking a list of people who have attacked her or smeared her, and then kind of hinted at a potential lawsuit. She's going to have a really hard time in court with that one, I think. But she's definitely sort of taking names and actually sort of backwards throwing some threats back at folks, saying, "Oh yeah, well I've got your number, I've got your name." But ultimately, I think she's just probably mad that this video that she gave in a sort of friendly context ended up going more worldwide, more viral, and other people didn't interpret it the same way that her very, very friendly crowd did. I think that's something that everyone who speaks in public deals with. That's not something that's exclusive to her. That's why politicians have to watch their words very carefully.
Well, it was inconvenient timing for her, to say the least, coming on the heels of this NRA march that the organizers of the Women's March planned. We're going to get to that later in the show, but first I want to go through our next really quick and fun segment, Real or Fake. And this is where our guest, Inez, has to guess whether the headlines I read are real or fake news. So the first one is, private college in Seattle requires incoming freshmen to take pronouns and gender expression 101 this fall. Real or fake?
It's so hard to tell these days, but I'm going to go with real, because I know that one college a while back had everyone put into the master roster their pronouns, which is how one kid put in His Majesty as his pronouns, then printed up on every single roster, and everyone had to refer to him as His Majesty. So I'm going to go with real.
So that one is actually fake, but I know exactly what you're talking about. That is a real story. So yeah. All right, next one. CBS bemoans and smears conservatives for using snowflake as an insult.
All of these sound real to me. Is that bad that maybe I have too low an opinion of the media, but I'm going to go with real.
You're right on that. That happens. I mean that happened. Going back to our first segment, I guess. All right, next one. Dear parents to be. This is a good one. Dear parents to be. Stop celebrating your baby's gender.
I did see this one, and that is real. Yeah. That was a Cosmopolitan article, right?
I believe it was Cosmopolitan, and they're actually telling parents to be not to have baby showers, gender reveal parties, because heaven forbid you label your child a male or a female. That's where we are today.
Taking all the fun out of life.
Yeah, I'm actually going to my first baby shower this weekend, so we'll see if anything like that comes up. All right, next one. Activists call for discontinuation of the Swedish chef Muppet due to cultural appropriation concerns.
I'm going to go with fake just because I haven't yet.
You're right on that one. That one's fake. We made that up. We had a lot of fun with that one. When one of my producers made that, I wasn't sure what was going on there, but you never know what happens these days. All right, next one. Trump sued by blocked Twitter users.
You know what? I believe that, because the left has such an expanding vision of the First Amendment these days, narrowing in some places, expanding in others. Obviously, they're famous for the narrowing part, but I have a legal background, so I happen to know a little bit of what sort of leftist legal academics think, and that would be right in line. Is that true? So
that one is true, and I'm curious, how does one go about suing him for blocking you on Twitter?
It's a really tenuous argument, but I would imagine what they'd be going for is trying to say that it's some kind of sort of public forum now, and that since the president is using it, to speak publicly, that certain people can't be locked out of that. I mean, I think that's a really, really tenuous argument.
Well, I hope you are a lead correspondent on that story. All right, last real or fake headline. Want to fight climate change? Have fewer children.
True.
I think Inez and I both contribute to the Federalist, and we actually came across this headline. I wasn't sure if you saw the emails, but this is actually what feminists are arguing right now. Not just feminists, but people who are hardcore on the climate change issue are actually arguing if you have children, you are contributing to climate change, so you should probably stop.
Yeah, there were a couple commentators actually that went with that this week. Children are bad for the environment. You shouldn't have any, or at least not a lot. So.
Before we get to our last segment, Problematic Women of the Week, I want to roll a clip from the women's march that they organized. It was a protest against the NRA, where they marched from the NRA to the DOJ. They were protesting an ad produced by the NRA and Dana Lash, and they were also protesting gun violence, bunch of Second Amendment issues raised there. But the Daily Signal, myself included, we actually went to see what was going on at this march, and surprisingly, one of the co-chairs of the Women's March agreed to do a quick interview with us. And so I raised an interesting question about this weird irony between the Women's March claiming that the NRA is inciting violence through the rhetoric that was portrayed in this NRA advertisement. And then you have conservatives on the other side who are very concerned about Linda Susar's use of the word jihad. And they thought it was inappropriate, and they thought it could incite violence against President Trump and his administration. So I tried to interview Linda. She turned me down. You can see her in the background of this video, but we did get Cameron Perez, another co-chair from the Women's March. So here you go.
Well, I don't necessarily think that's the worry. I think that's what people got out of that, and it's extremely divisive. They call themselves one of the first civil rights organizations, and working for somebody like Harry Belafonte, I understand what civil rights means, and we're also grounded in Kingian nonviolence, and so we don't incite violence onto others. We are peaceful. Not only are we protesters, we run organizations, we work on policy, we work with young people that are in community, and so putting out a video that demonstrated or that showed to the world that protesters were violent is a misrepresentation of who we really are.
My last question, it seems like there is some irony here where both sides are claiming people are using rhetoric to incite violence. I know a lot of conservatives right now, I was trying to grab Linda, are upset about her nonviolent use of jihad, but they are concerned about.
Well, I think that's misrepresented as well. I think people need to understand that, you know, there are a lot of extreme Christians. We don't necessarily attack every Christian for what has happened here in this country, right, under their religion. And so I think people really need to understand history, need to understand language, get to know one another, step outside of their comfort zone to meet people where they're at, and to also understand that we are in a very diverse country, right? The way things were happening previously aren't working at this moment. So it's important that people understand what Linda truly meant, which didn't mean that. There was no
do you think with our history of jihad, our American experience with jihad,
I don't know.
Years, she maybe could have been a little more sensitive?
I don't necessarily. No, I think we actually need to do our homework. That's what we need to do. So it's not necessarily people having to constantly nuke their message or filter what they're saying. I think people really need to understand and get outside of their own personal experience to really comprehend what's going on with other communities. And I think oftentimes that's what happens. We are not upset that there are people here talking about their right to the Second Amendment, the First Amendment, right? What we are saying, yes, we are here with you. We understand that you have the right to bear arms. We just don't want these arms in our community that happen at the interview. Thanks.
Well, thank you.
So what I thought about this interview was interesting that she said people need to go out of their way to meet people with different perspectives. And that's really exactly what I was trying to do in this case. I went to their protest. I tried to interview Linda. She turned me away, and I was able to interview someone else to their credit. But when you try to have these conversations, they just say we need to have them, and then nothing ever gets resolved. It just seems like both sides keep talking at each other rather than with each other.
Right. Well, I mean, it's very difficult to talk to people who get offended at everything, right? I mean, it's very difficult to get. I remember, I think it was Eric Holder who said America needs to have a really frank conversation about race. I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea, right? But it's a really difficult conversation to have if everybody's getting offended at every other thing. And so I think that's a little bit I've noticed that in the past with the left, right? They call for conversation, and then as soon as you try to actually have a dialogue with them, they find everything you say is so offensive that they can't possibly listen to it anymore. And that's how we end up with our campuses today, not being able to host conservative speakers at all.
Well, I raised some of the irony of exactly what you're talking about in the video that I did on this subject, because they are the ones always throwing around these trigger warnings and asking for trigger warnings and saying you're not being sensitive enough. Well, my argument here sort of is that we as Americans, I mean, I grew up, I knew people in my class whose fathers died during 9/11. Like, jihad is a very difficult and sensitive concept for Americans. We've had a really traumatic experience with it, and she not only just used it, but she used it against the president of our country and his entire administration, who I also know people in the administration, and to even think of this word being used against him. Of course, again, she did not mean it in a violent term, but if they want us to come to them and understand where they are, you would think that she would have responded differently to the criticism she faced after using the word jihad.
Well, I mean, I think that's just another demonstration of the hypocrisy at work here.
All right, well, this leads us right into our last segment of the day, Problematic Women of the Week. The crown, of course, goes to Dana Loesch. Dana Loesch was the one who was in this NRA video that triggered the whole march from the NRA to the DOJ. I will mention in 90-degree heat. It was over 90 degrees on Friday. Huge thunderstorms, actually. So it seems that Dana is highly problematic to this group of people. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you had a great article, was it like a week ago, 2 weeks ago, in the Federalist talking about this concept of problematic women, right? And it was based on an article from, Marie Claire?
Elle Magazine.
Elle Magazine.
A women's magazine, no less.
Right, so a women's magazine, presumably, the country's roughly split. Maybe there are a little fewer women on the conservative side, but still, it's above 40%, probably. So 40% of their readers, they basically termed them problematic women and said, oh, we don't have to support them because they're not in favor of all of these leftist concepts, so therefore they're not women that we have to support. As women, not politically support. That would be ridiculous, right? But we shouldn't have to support them or say nice things
when they
about
come
them.
Under sexist attacks.
Right, that was it, right? So that was the whole concept. I think Dana Loesch is a tough lady. I think she's perfectly capable of handling herself and her firearms. I don't think she needs a shield, but I think this is a really good honor to bestow on her.
Well, we'll have to let her know that she is crowned Problematic Woman of the Week, and we love her for that. The last thing I want to leave you all on is a comment that we received on our last show, Problematic Woman, that aired last week. It was from Alice Rivas, who wrote on her Facebook page, #Problematic women are intelligent, eloquent, conservative humans who care about politics and our world. They care about the unborn life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness with less government intervention. So, Alice, we appreciate that comment, and we'd encourage anyone else watching to leave your comments on what you think on problematic women. Let us know if you think there's a problematic woman out there who we need to cover. Let us know if you are a problematic woman. We do have T-shirts over at the Federalist. Have you got yours yet?
I have. I got mine in the mail, I think a few days ago. So
we need to see your selfie. I'm not sure we saw your selfie yet.
It was a knockoff of the whole nasty woman thing. So we at the Federalist decided, since we have so many female writers, that we were going to have problematic women T-shirts, problematic woman T-shirts printed up. So those are available over at the Federalist. Yeah, we've been having some fun with those. I know they're also getting tank tops designed. But for Inez, for anyone who wants to follow you and your work, what's the best way to do so? You can follow me on Twitter at Inez Felcher. My last name's a little difficult to spell, but I guess we need to update that now that you're married, though. I've updated it on the name part of it, but not the actual @ handle. I don't even know if you can do that. I'm not very good with technology. That would be a whole other thing. You can follow me on Twitter or check out my columns at the Federalist. Well, thank you all for watching. We really appreciate it. This is a new show on the Daily Signal, so please leave us feedback. Let us know if you like it. Let us know if you have segment ideas. We'd love to hear your feedback and engagement. Definitely hit that subscribe button if you want to know every time we go live. And thank you so much for joining. Have a great Sunday.